Zoning with Robocop is extremely straightforward and simple, yet self-sustaining. This means he just about has an answer for everything the opponent might do to approach in order to keep him at a safe distance. So how do you zone with variation to Robocop, and what exactly makes his projectile so strong? Let's dive in. Now, I will argue that what makes Robocop so good at projectile zoning is because he's also good at not doing that, with a 10-frame midstream, a 15-frame triple low poke that pushes the opponent away on block, and an advancing 13-frame mid for whiff punishing. Robocop never feels pressured to commit to running away and throwing projectiles. The strongest kind of zoning is the kind of zoning your opponent won't expect. From my experience, he's way better off up close than Scarlet, especially defensively. Onto Robocop's projectiles, starting with back forward 1, an 18-frame mid projectile with 13 frames of recovery. This is a relatively fast projectile that slows down over time. The faster recovery means that while Robocop is always minus on block with this attack, whiffing low auto 9 isn't nearly as bad as you might think. Use this as your primary move checker and amplify to call out jump-ins, chip kill, and whenever you think your opponent might try moving after blocking an unamplified low auto 9. Back forward 2, an 18-frame high projectile with 40 frames of recovery. Compared to low auto 9, this is a slightly slower velocity projectile that remains constant over time. While whiffing armed CC cannon is certainly punishing, the reward is extremely high. A hit with this projectile takes your opponent nearly back to full screen and has an incredible amount of pushback on block. Use armed CC cannon only when you're certain your opponent isn't going to duck, such as walking forward or jumping farther away. This attack will whiff when your opponent does a forward jump up close, however, leading to our next projectile. Down back 1, a 10-frame anti-air projectile with 34 frames of recovery. This is just a godlike anti-air in my opinion, just as fast as your down 2, but superior in every way. Amplify for that big boy damage afterwards. If your opponent forward jumps up close to overcome your zoning, you use this, the high auto 9, instead of armed CC cannon, and teach them the harsh ways of this cruel, cruel world. Down back 4, a 16-frame projectile with a relatively slow projectile velocity. It has a fairly wide hitbox, which makes it really good for catching wake-ups and forcing your opponent to block after getting knocked down. Beyond that though, it disappears on trades, so it's not really good for using in a neutral situation or anything like that. Onto Robocop's buttons. Robocop's back 4 is a 15-frame low sweep attack where he fires 3 bullets at the ground. Now up close, it will deal 70 damage on hit and 10.5 damage on block. When only the second bullet connects, it will deal 20 damage on hit and only 3 damage on block. Farther away, it deals at maximum range 50 damage on hit and 7.5 on block. Just before its maximum range, hitting your opponent with back 4 does the least amount of damage with only the second bullet connecting. On hit, it also causes knockback instead of knockdown, with no real usable frame advantage. Due to the advantage of the final bullet not connecting on either hit nor block, this likely was not intentional or like a bug, as it also does the least amount of damage. Until it gets patched, it's just something to be aware of that might happen. Now Robocop's down 4 is a 15-frame low poke that has the same range as his back 4, so it's surprisingly far-reaching. However, it offers less pushback, making it on block less safe than back 4, despite that move being minus 11 on block. But I will argue that because Robocop crouches down for the animation, that it's a great little poke that keeps opponents with advancing highs a good distance on hit from him. A good call out for sure. When zoning, you are always constantly assessing your opponent for opportunities to zone. You are able to react to jumping with armed CC cannon, and react to your opponent's high projectiles with low auto 9, so remaining in a neutral state as often as possible is extremely important to Robocop zoning. Therefore, your movement checking should be used as judiciously as humanly possible. Once you have established that your opponent values moving forward more than jumping or firing projectiles, you can adapt and check movement more often with amplified low auto 9. Such a decision requires you to constantly read and assess your opponent, and how you zone will greatly depend on the player you play against. A common strategy against Robocop is the classic walk and block technique. Block the projectile and walk forward. To counter this, walk back between your projectiles and further condition your opponent to walk and blocking, and then surprise them with a dash-in 10-frame throw the next time they block. After this happens, do a dash-in mid-strike to enforce a strike-throw mix-up after a dash, alongside walk-back and projectiles. Don't forget to special cancel into Flamethrower for standing reset mix-ups if the opponent gets hit by the strike string. Using backdash into back 4 after forward 2-1 is a common strategy for conditioning your opponent into getting crushing blowed by forward 2-1-2. Backdashing after forward 2-1 will lose to most of the faster, longer reaching or advancing pokes, but will make down 1 your opponent's most common check, whiff with the back 4 afterwards, now with punishing it. Your opponent, now not using down 1 to check the stagger, is now committing to a button which Robocop can now either safely punish or take his turn back, or counter with crushing blow in forward 2-1-2. And I think that's most of my thoughts about variation to Robocop's zoning so far. I'm always learning Robocop, and I'd like to hear what you might have learned yourself about zoning with him in the comments. This is Mormel, and this was Learning the Basics of Zoning with Variation to Robocop.
You are coming with me.